Happy to see each of you here this evening, especially as we consider the message of the third angel. So far in this series, we have learned about the value of truth, and especially truth that is designed for this present time. We learned about the special message of the third angel, which includes the first and second angel's messages, and we learned that the everlasting gospel was the foundation of each of these messages. Tonight, let us just go through the third angel's message briefly. We're going to read verses 19 to 13, where it says, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascended up forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, say the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." There are quite a few important things in this passage here. It introduces the beast. What is this beast? It introduces the image of that beast. It talks about the mark of the beast. And obviously in this context, this is the sealing angel. Now, tonight we don't have time to address all these points here. These are some points that we need to look at in the future. But I'd like to evaluate some aspects of this third message. When we look at this message from Revelation 14, starting with verse 6, and going all the way down to verse 13, it shows here the result. It says, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. We find here then that the result of these messages is a people keeping the commandments of God. Now, on Sunday night, we'll kind of go a little bit more what is necessary in order to have the patience of the saints. But again, here it's a group of people that keep the commandments of God. Now, when we're talking about the commandments of God, let's keep in mind that we began this whole series by trying to understand how important truth is. Truth was very important, especially present truth. We find in Psalms 119, verse 142, "Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth." That means that when we're talking about the truth, to have the truth, we understood that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. But Jesus also then is synonymous to the law, because the law is the truth. And so if a person claims to have the truth, and yet they're disregarding the law, in 1 John 2, verse 4, it says, "He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him." Again, we learned that the truth is who? Who is the truth? Jesus Christ. Okay, so in reality here, he that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar, and Jesus is not in him. That's a very important, the connection's very clear, that having Jesus Christ, the truth, results in keeping the commandments. And in Revelation 14 that we just read a moment ago, the purpose of those three angels' messages, starting with the everlasting gospel, is to lead to the keeping of the commandments of God. And for this reason, when we're talking about a reformation, it has to do with the law of God. It says here, the great reformatory movement must begin in presenting to fathers and mothers and children the principles of the law of God. Why? Because the principles of the law of God are the principles of truth. The principles of truth are the principles of Jesus Christ. And so you can't have a reformation without a clear understanding of the law of God. We also know that at the time of the end, every divine institution is to be restored. The breach made in the law at the time the Sabbath was changed by man is to be repaired. God's remnant people standing before the world as reformers are to show that the law of God is the foundation of all enduring reform, and that the Sabbath of the fourth commandment is to stand as a memorial of creation, a constant reminder of the power of God. We kind of talked a little bit about the Sabbath when we're talking about fearing God and giving him glory of the first angel. So this is why it has to be the foundation of all enduring reform, because the law of God is showing his character, and we need to be changed to that. And so what happens to those who do keep the law of God? What happens through the everlasting gospel that we find in the first angel and the power of the truth, which is Jesus Christ? Okay, what happens as a result? Those who do keep the commandments of God. In Revelation 22:14 says, "Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city." So here, when we're talking about going into the kingdom of God, you have to have some respect for his rules, some respect for his laws. When somebody comes to your home, what do they have to do? They have to respect your principles that you have in your home. If we're going to the city of God, we need to have respect to what? To the principles of his city. There are certain principles that are undeniable there. When I moved to Australia, when I was there in Australia, I mean, they have different laws. And, you can say all you want. That's not how we do in America. I complained one time about a breath test. I had a breath test entering in a town and a breath test leaving the town. It was within half an hour, and each of them wasting my time. And I grumbled about something, and he says, "This isn't America. These are different rules, different laws. You have to understand that." And so when we're going to a place, what are you going to do? It's not just on how you want to live. And so here, blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have what? The right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. Now, keep in mind that when we're looking at the commandments of God, it's not selective. We can't be selective, just deciding, I like this one, I don't like that one. It says in James 2, "For whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he is guilty of all. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now if thou commit no adultery, that thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law." So the law is a whole. You break a bit of it, you're breaking the whole thing. And that's why it's imperative that we keep the entire law. Now, this law that we have, something needs to happen to it. In Isaiah 8, it says, bind the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. Any law needs to be sealed. Any law needs to have force. It has to be sealed. It has to be approved. Here in the United States, they make different laws. Congress makes laws. States make laws. All these things, but they all have to go through a process. They vote for a law. It's not automatic that it's a law. It still has to go to the governor. And when the governor signs it, it still needs to be enforced. It needs to be put in place. It takes a bit of time to do all of that. Now, when we're looking at the law is really important. Why is that? In Isaiah chapter 8, still in Isaiah chapter 8, when we look at the law, it says in verse 19, "And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God for the living to the dead?" A lot of times people are looking to the dead people to give them some measure of understanding. Here in America, as they're going away more and more from Christianity, they've been distancing themselves from Christianity for years already. Okay, from the principles of Christianity, but now it's becoming a little bit more overt. And you'll notice it's always going back to the Indian religions here, or the African religions, or all these other things. And a lot of them have to do with the dead. All these things, they're dealing with the spirits of the dead, communicating with the spirits of the dead. And so here he says, should not a people seek unto their God for the living to the dead? To go to the living God instead of to the dead one. And how do we know what God wants? Do you need to sit here and wait for some type of a thing? Today I was listening to a discussion about a Supreme Court decision that happened quite a few years ago. And it was dealing with, they were comparing one of the standards in the workforce was because of a Seventh-day Adventist. She had sued because they had denied her unemployment because she was fired rather than let go. And she was fired because of a religious stance. Anyway, the Supreme Court upheld it and they had to pay her. But now the other case was this Indian religion, and it had to do with peyote. Peyote is a substance, some type of a cactus that gives you a high. And this guy was working in a rehab place, and he was practicing his own religion, which was taking peyote. And you take that high, and then you can communicate. Then you can have, that's part of their religion. Anyway, they lost the case, and they're still discussing it. And of course, with NPR being a liberal station, they're trying to explain how that should have been upheld and why it was wrong not to be. But again, they're trying to communicate with what? With the dead. They're trying to have communication from the other side. And God's saying, look, don't communicate with the dead. You got me. I'm a living God. And they want to know what to do, how to live their life by communicating with these things. And God says, I am the living God, not a dead God. And then he brings in verse 20, to the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So in other words, what you find here is that the law is an expression of the will of God. I don't need to go talk to a dead person. Okay, I don't need to communicate with the spirits from another world. I have a living God, and he has given me the law, and I need to follow that law for his guidance. Another thing really important about our God, we mentioned this the last couple of weeks, but let's talk about it again, that identifies God is that he is the creator. Isaiah 45, verse 18. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He had established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. The way you understand who the true God is simply by the fact that he is the creator. He is the one that created everything. That gives him the right to be worshipped. Now, there's only one commandment. If we look at the 10 commandments, there's only one commandment that brings about God as the creator. You know, if you look at all the other commandments, any of these religions that we can have kind of have some ideas of those things. They all have some moral things. Now, of course, they're changing morality and everything else, but in the 10 Commandments, there's only one commandment that brings about, that identifies the only true God. And the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in, or because, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So here again, the reason that we worship on the seventh day is because it's a reminder that God created the heavens and the earth. And because God is the creator, it reminds us of the only true God. This is the only commandment that identifies him as the creator God. And this is why the seal of God must be this identifying commandment. Next Friday night, we'll be kind of going a little bit more into this whole thing about the seal of God. Now, who is to be sealed? We have Revelation 7, verse 2 to 4. It says, and I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. So we find here there's work of the sealing of the 144,000 must be something very important, because it has to do with the law of God. It sealed the law among my disciples. Now we go to these three angels' messages, and we need to look at the context of these messages. In Revelation 14, when you finish verse 13, which is the end of the third angel's message, this next scene is brought about in verse 14 through 16. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Clearly, when we finish the third angel's message, we find another angel. This angel is not coming with a message of salvation, because this is after the work is finished, and you have here the harvest itself, because a sharp sickle is used in the harvest. And here it says, the time for the earth to be reaped, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So we find here that this is the reaping of the earth following these three angels' messages. Now this chapter begins, also has a beginning. So the context, the ending was the reaping of the earth. It begins, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. So this chapter begins with the 144,000. And these are the 144,000 we just read a moment ago that are what? They are sealed. They are a group of people that are sealed. So if we look at the three angels' messages in Revelation 14, from what we have learned so far, we had the first angel that we kind of covered a little bit more last week. We have the second angel's message. We're not actually going to take time during this series to deal with the second angel's message. And then you have the third angel's message. And of course, you have here that the combined result of all of these messages is a group of people that keep the commandments of God. And that's basically the ones that are sealed. This is the group of people that are sealed in Revelation 7 and Revelation 14. We need to understand what these sealed ones are doing. This is how it's going to connect it all together to all these three angels' messages. It says in verse 2 and 3, And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song, before the throne and before the beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000, which were redeemed from the earth. So only who can understand, who can sing that song? The 144,000. Okay, why is it? What is the song that they are singing? Notice in Revelation 15, verse 2 and 3, it says, And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God, and they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. So they're singing the song of Moses. And keep in mind, the song of Moses was when? When they were delivered out of Egyptian slavery. They had gone through the Red Sea. They were delivered. They were heading for Canaan land. Now, notice here, according to this, it's not just the song of Moses back then, but the song of Moses when he was taken to heaven, actually. It's the final victory. It was complete victory, not just partial victory. And here, you notice here, they had the victory over the beast. And when we read the third angel, he had what? He talks about not to worship the beast, nor his image, nor the mark of the beast. So here in Revelation 15, the song of Moses is definitely a song of those who overcome those in the third angel's message. Those are the same overcomers. And this is why in the beginning of the chapter 14, when it talks about the 144,000, they are a group of people that have overcome all of these things. Now, in this context, because as we look at this whole context, we find here in Revelation 14, verse 4, these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These are redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. So when we study in the Bible, and we don't have time to go through all of this right now, but if you have any questions, we can deal with that tomorrow. But these were not defiled with women. Women in the Bible are a symbol of churches. A pure woman is a pure church. A defiled woman is a defiled church. And here, these are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. That means they have separated from the fallacies. They have separated from Babylon, because that is the impure woman of Revelation chapter 17. So that means that they are actually separate from Babylon, because they have taken the second angel's message seriously. And now let's take a look at their character. Let's take a look at the character of this group of people. It says here, in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So they are what? Without fault. To what extent are they without fault? The verse began with, in their mouth was found what? No guile. So when we are looking at guile, no guile, what type of person does not have guile in their mouth? What type of a person controls their mouth? Notice here in James 3 verse 2, for in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. You know, it's interesting. You take a huge animal like a horse, and you know the horse can be controlled by a bit. Where? Right in his mouth. You control that whole beast by the mouth. And there's quite a few animals you control by the mouth. You put something there in the mouth, and you turn around and you control them quite simply like that. You know, even dogs. You know, dogs come at you, you know, they want to bite, they want to go after you. And I've learned a very important thing with dogs. First of all, not to be afraid of them. They're more afraid of you than you are of them. And secondly, it all has to do with their mouth. And their mouth cannot close on a fist like that. And so the first thing I do when a dog comes, I put my fist there just like that. And I've had dogs, ferocious dogs, try to bite me, and they can't bite. And they get confused because they're expecting you to run off and you don't. Now they're trying to get you to the side because they can't bite you on the side. But if you do it like this, they can't. It all has to do with the mouth. And here, and the same thing with human beings. If we control the mouth, we are perfect. And this is why in Revelation 14 it says what? In their mouth was found what? No guile. That means that they have perfected. So this means that the 144,000 are perfect. That means they're perfect in obedience to the commandments of God. That means that they have developed a character as a result of these three messages. And that's why it's so important for us to take time to study the character traits of the 144,000. We don't have time, again, in this series to do that, but that's something for us to look at. What is the character traits of the 144,000? One thing we know that this character traits they must have before they can have obedience, because here are they that keep the commandments of God, but the character trait is what? Here is the patience of the saints. That means that in order to have that character trait, they must have patience. Now, what is it that they must have before they can have patience? Notice 2 Peter 1:6, and to knowledge, this is on Peter's ladder, they're adding things, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness. That means that you add patience only to temperance. That means that there has to be something to do with health message. And we'll kind of go in more into detail with that on Sunday night. But I do want to read this. The gospel of health has able advocates, but their work has been made very hard because so many ministers, presidents of conferences, and others in positions of influence had failed to give the question of health reform its proper attention. They have not recognized it in its relation to the work of the message as the right arm of the body. When properly conducted, the health work is an entering wedge, making a way for other truths to reach the heart. That's where the health message is. When the third angel's message is received in its fullness, health reform will be given its place in the councils of the conference, in the work of the church, in the home, at the table, and in all the household arrangements. Then the right arm will serve and protect the body. Again, we're going to cover a little bit more on Sunday night, but one thing is clear, that when we accept the third angel's message properly, it's going to change the way we live. And among that, it's going to be changing the way we eat. And again, if you notice there, the bridle, the mouth, okay, he that deals with the tongue, and the tongue is not only dealing with words, but what else? It has to do with your taste buds, okay, and that also has a direct effect. We also find that in Revelation 12:17, God has given a guiding hand to his people. It says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So we find here there are two things that are we have the keeping of the commandments. We kind of touched on that already, but there is something associated with that which is called the testimony of Jesus Christ, and that they are hand in hand. And this is why the very last deception will be to make of none effect the testimony of the Spirit of God. And that's why it's so important for us to understand what is the testimony of Jesus. So that's another thing we need to study. What is this testimony of Jesus? Because that's going to be the last deception that Satan has upon this world. Now, this is basically what we have just kind of summarized a few things about the third angel's message. Again, we don't have time to go in details, but what we do need to understand is what we need to do with this truth. What are we to do with this truth? First of all, in Proverbs, one of the most important things that has to happen, it says, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the tables of thy heart. So one of the most important things is that the truth needs to be in the heart. See, that's the key. Key to everything, key to religion has to be in the heart. If it's not in the heart, you can forget it. And this is why there's a lot of people struggling with religion, because it's not in their heart. And so they're going through ceremonies, but ceremonies can only take you so far. Okay? The ceremonies, sometimes people come up with elaborate ceremonies. They want more ceremonies. They want to have rituals. They want to go through different rituals. And I keep hearing on the radio, they're talking about rituals that you need to have. And they're thinking of that religious-wise. So whatever religion you have, make sure you go through the rituals. Okay, but the rituals don't get you anywhere. You get tired of it. It doesn't give you there. So how is it that it changes from ritual to life? It has to be on the tables of the heart. When it's in your heart, it's completely different than when it's simply a ritual. The other thing important is the key text that we read in the very beginning is how we teach this truth. It says here in Ephesians 4:15, but speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. That means that we need to teach this truth in love. When you're teaching somebody one thing, it's one thing, but when you love someone and you're teaching them, there's a whole different thing. If you have your child, those of you who have children, the child, as they're growing up, they're making a lot of mistakes, and they may fall, they may do all this stuff. But you love the child, and they're making noise when you want to study. They're doing all these things that are really absolutely annoying, but they're not annoying to you. Why not? Why not? Because you love them. Okay, now they're doing exactly the same thing. Another person comes in who doesn't love them, and what happens? Everything's annoying. You need to beat that child. You need to do this. You need to do that. And you're like, but it's my child. I love that child. Okay, so what happens when we're teaching the truth in love? When we're not having the love, we get frustrated. Especially when you're looking at some people who are struggling. I remember this guy, he was about 50, his early 50s. And, most of his adult life he spent in prison. He'd go to prison, he'd get out. Not long after that, he's back in prison again. And the way I met him was somehow or another, this lady in our church, she decided to get married to him. And she told me, no, I know what I'm doing. Doesn't matter what happens. I'm going to marry this guy. Anyway, 2 days before the wedding, he got arrested again. He's back in prison. So that kind of delayed the wedding for a while. And I told her she should not marry him until he's, I forgot what I told her, 1 year or 2 years out of prison and able to live. Then you can marry the guy. So anyway, so then I had to go to prison and visit this guy. You're visiting him and seeing his struggles. Anyway, he gets out of prison, and we start having regular Bible studies. It takes us about 2 years to get him ready for baptism. He's finally ready for baptism, and after baptism, she wants to marry this guy. Anyway, about, it was in beginning of December, I came home, and the baptism would be at the end of December, and I want to go visit him and just see how he's doing, but he's not answering my phone anymore. No phone answers, nothing else, and anyway, he's back in prison. Okay. So that's just his life. Now, how do you deal with a person like that? Well, it depends. If you don't care for the guy, then good riddance, back in prison. That's what he deserves. If you care, if you love the person, what do? You go visit him back in prison. And you go through and start the process all over again. And finally, he was getting released. He spent a couple years in prison. He's getting released. And I really wanted somebody to go actually meet him at the gate of the prison as he's coming out. Okay, I was leaving that day. I was traveling overseas. I couldn't be there. So I asked somebody to go there. And anyway, after the visit that I came home, I called up and to see what happened, well, we didn't have time. We didn't have time. Anyway, that week that I got home, I'd been gone for a couple of months. And so my wife and I, we went out to the ocean side to spend a couple of days together before I get back into the swing of things. And I got a phone call that either he was killed or he had committed suicide, one or the other. Why? Because that's, when people are in sin, they're in that cycle. And then we were talking about it, and one of our brethren, he was working in the prison doing some electrical work. And they had a guy there just that day. He went and attacked the guard. He was about to be released from prison. He was like a week away from prison release, and he attacked the guard. Didn't hurt him too much, but he attacked the guard, and now he has an additional, I don't know how many years left to his sentence now, added to his sentence. Why? He's fearful of going out into society. He's been there for so long. And so we got to understand something when we're speaking the truth in love. We need to understand that we're dealing with people. Sometimes there are people that have been in the sin for so long, they don't know how to get out of it. And they'll keep falling back in. And what happens? Just like a child who is acting up, how do you treat that child? Well, it depends. If you love them or if you don't love them. If you don't love them, here's the stuff we need to deal with them. Throw in prison, do this, that, and the other. Throw them in prison and throw the key away. You've heard that before. 3 strikes and you're out. 3 strikes and you're out sounds like a good law if they're not your family, if they're not somebody you love. If somebody you love, what happens? Oh, the 3 strikes. They didn't mean it that way. Give them another chance. Isn't that what happens? Okay, so this is how we teach this truth. When we're dealing with the truth, we got to understand how we're dealing with it, how we're dealing with different types of people. Now, the only way that we can teach the truth in love, first of all, we must love it. Okay, in 2 Thessalonians it says, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth that they might be saved. And it goes on, God is going to send them a strong delusion. Why does God send them a strong delusion? Because they don't receive the truth in love. So do you love the truth? Are you in love with the message? When you're in love with the truth, it changes how you're dealing with people. It changes our approach to people. It changes everything about our message. And you can get the message, these are the rules, and you can look at each rule and follow it exactly that way. And people say, those are the rules, follow the rules. Okay, well, if you're going to follow the rules, all of us should be dead. But God, what does he do? He follows the rules, but he also what? He finds a way of salvation. How do you help somebody even if it falls down many times? So we need to understand that when we're dealing with this whole truth, it's not just at the beginning. At the very beginning, sometimes we're all excited about the truth. We give our heart to the Lord. We want to serve the Lord for the rest of our lives. But then here it says in Mark 13:13, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved. He that what? Shall endure until the end. And I see a lot of people, they start the journey. I even seen over the years a lot of people get baptized. And maybe even you look at the people, when I look at the people that were baptized together with me, I think there was about 4 of us that got baptized. One was an older man, and he passed away in the truth. He was already older. He was near the end of his life, so he didn't have much life to live. But the rest of them, the other 2, they're not in the truth anymore. You see, so it's the enduring unto the end. We need to look at enduring unto the end. When we're looking at the truth and how much we need to endure, it says, those who would rather die than perform a wrong act are the only ones who will be found faithful. So in reality, this is the test that will be for us, to be able to help us endure and to come to the point where we'd rather die than perform a wrong act. That means all of us need to make improvements. When we're studying these 3 messages, we realize that many of us, I'd rather die than give up the truth. How many people tell us, I'd give up $1 million for Christ. Yeah, you would, because you don't have $1 million. Okay, and it's hard enough to give $10. Okay, and you give up $1 million that you don't have, but the $10 you have, you wouldn't give that one up. Okay, so in reality, when we're not tested like this, all of us would rather die than give up the truth. But what happens when we're tested? What happens when the trial comes? See, those are the things that God is allowing us to go through so that this message can be in our hearts. When we look at our test, when the religion of Christ is most held in contempt, when his law is most despised, then should our zeal be the warmest and our courage and firmness the most unflinching. To stand in defense of truth and righteousness when the majority forsake us, to fight the battles of the Lord when champions are few, this will be our test. It's easy when everybody's coming along. Sometimes even with young people, sometimes one wants to get baptized and another, and next thing you know, you have 10, 12, 14 people getting baptized. Okay, it's easy going there. How about when you're by yourself? When I used to give regular Bible studies to people, that was, I wasn't doing much administration, but just giving regular Bible studies. I was studying with this lady, and one of the questions that I asked her before baptism was, are you prepared to, do you believe this truth so much that if you're the only one left, that you're going to keep it? And she had to think about that one, and eventually she wrestled with it, and she said, yes, I would. And some years later, she moved to another region of the country. And in that region, majority of the church apostatized where she was at. And they asked her, what are you going to do? She says, I was already asked that at my baptism. I'm not going anywhere. I've made my decision. So to stand in defense of truth and righteousness when what? When the majority forsake us. To fight the battle of the Lord when champions are few. This will be our test. So when we're looking at this message, when we're looking at the second coming of Christ, and we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, why are we still here in 2024? But it says here, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. And a lot of times people think that all we have to do is preach the gospel everywhere and then Christ will come. But it takes a little bit more than that. But we still need to share that message. So we see the great need of missionary work to carry the truth not only to foreign countries, but to those who are near us. Close around us are cities and towns in which no efforts are made to save souls. Why should not families who know the present truth settle in these cities and villages to set up there the standard of Christ, working in humility, not in their own way, but in God's way, to bring the light before those who have no knowledge of it? When the church shall truly have the spirit of the message, they will throw all their energies into the work of saving the souls for whom Christ has died. They will enter new fields. Some who are not ordained ministers will be laborers together with God in visiting the churches and trying to strengthen the things that remain that are ready to die. So we find here that we need to look at the work that we need to do is to share this message. We need to share this message to the world. But first of all, it must be in our hearts. That's the only way it's going to get to the world, is when it's in our hearts. One thing is sure, that God has not called his people to ignore present truth for these last days. That's what we've been studying, is present truth. And to take up a work that so absorbs workers and means that the Lord is not represented as he would otherwise be. In this whole thing of sharing the truth in other places, we need to remember and understand what the truth is. When we understand the truth and the value of truth, it's not going to be, oh, let's see how we can water it down for somebody. When you know that the truth is truth, that it's a wonderful message, then you're going to understand why it says here, no line of truth that has made the Seventh-day Adventist people what they are is to be weakened. We have the old landmarks of truth, experience, and duty, and we are to stand firmly in defense of our principles in full view of the world. So we need to make sure that we share that with the world. So we go back now to the prayer of Christ. That our prayer, the prayer that we should have, that is inspired by Christ in the Psalms. It says, lead me in thy truth and teach me, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day long. The truth is something important. When we understand the truth as Jesus, now we've looked at different aspects of the truth, especially present truth. We've looked at the law is the truth. All these things are related to Jesus Christ. When we understand, lead me into the truth, lead me into Jesus and teach me, then we can understand that that's someone we can love. We can love the truth. We can love Jesus because he is the truth. And may the Lord help us as we look at these three messages, that we'll appreciate the value of these messages more than ever before. Amen.